Good morning, or depending on when you're watching this, good afternoon, good evening, or good night. My name's Ross, and as always told, out of Voice of Radio. So today we need to take a look at the FAQ for Inferno X. There's stuff we need to know about this set. There's new cards, new rulings. These are going to be in Phantasmal Flames over here. But for now, we need to have a look at the rulings from Inferno X as they've been posted over in Japan. And let's start with one of, well, what is obviously, I think pretty obviously anyway, one of the biggest cards in the entire set. We are talking, of course, about Battle Coliseum. It says prevent all damage counters from being placed on bench Pokemon by effects of the attacks or abilities used by the opponent's Pokemon. Cool. So, with that borne in mind, can I use my own attacks and abilities to place damage counters on my own Pokemon? Yes, absolutely. Because it only stops damage counters coming down from your opponent. That's absolutely fine. Can I use Toxtricity's ability to attach a basic darkness energy and then take 2 damage counters as a result of that? Yes. Again, this is your ability, so you're going to be absolutely fine. Can I use Monkey Dory's ability Adrenabrain to select up to 3 damage counters from one of my Pokemon and place them on my opponent's active? Yes, you can. Remember, this only stops abilities and attacks placing damage counters on the bench Pokemon. Moving to the active, you'll be absolutely fine. What if you use Alakazam's Strange Hacking? This is the Alakazam that came around in Twilight Masquerade to move damage counters from my opponent's Pokemon to their other Pokemon in any way you like. You could also see this in a very similar way to Monkey Dory, where you're moving damage rather than just placing. And the answer is you can take the damage off, but you cannot put it on your opponent's bench Pokemon, which means that it's just going to be removed from there, but then you're not replacing it. So you can move any number of damage counters from your opponent's Pokemon, but then you don't get to actually put them anywhere, which can be good if you're just healing with your own Monkey Dory, less good if you are just healing your opponent using Alakazam. What about using... Yeah, we're still on Battle Coliseum. We're legitimately still on Battle Coliseum here. It's kind of a big deal. What about using Grimmsnarl Shadow Bullet to deal 30 damage to one of my opponent's bench Pokemon? Yes, because Battle Coliseum stops effects of attacks or abilities, and damage is not an effective attack, so you're absolutely fine. What about another Alakazam? What about... Yeah, we're still on Battle Coliseum. Mega Evolution Alakazam that for a single energy places 2 damage counters on your opponent's active Pokemon for each card in your hand. Will that still work? Yes! Absolutely. Because you are damaging the active, so you're absolutely fine. Well, what about using Dragapult to drop damage counters on my opponent's bench Pokemon? No! You can't damage the bench. We've talked about this. There we go. What about using Dusknoir's Curse Blast here, whereby you knock out Dusknoir and then deal 13 damage counters? What happens then? Will it be knocked out? Yeah, of course it will. It doesn't stop you using the ability. It doesn't stop you using the attack. What it does is it stops you placing damage counters or doing other effective attacks with attacks and abilities. Well, yeah. So you use the ability, you knock out Dusknoir, but then you don't actually get to place the damage counters, so you just end up with a KO Dusknoir, which can sometimes be helpful, but it's not the main thing you're looking to do here. Now, the new Grimsley card coming in the set is actually incredibly interesting, because unless you look at the top 7 cards of your deck, it's Grimsley's move or something along those lines, and choose a Darkness type Pokemon you find there and put it straight onto your bench. Can you use this to get an evolution Pokemon straight onto your bench? Yeah, of course you can. There's nothing to say that you can't, so you totally can. Okay. Well, we've got that Team Rocket's Tower Stadium card that turns off abilities of colourless Pokemon. Well, what if you've got a Mega Kangaskhan attacking you, but you've got the new Sacred Charm attached that reduces damage done by 30 by Pokemon with abilities, and there's a Team Rocket's Tower in play? Does it still get minus by 30? No. Because the stadium has taken away the ability, therefore the Pokemon has no ability, therefore the damage is not reduced by 30. Okay. Seems a bit mean, but totally makes sense. I agree. Now there is a Jumbo Ice Cream that just heals 80 damage from your active Pokemon if they've got 3 or more energy attached. What if you've got 2 energy attached, but they're both grass and you've got a Meganium, which doubles up both of them to turn it into 4? Can you use this to heal? Yeah, of course you can. Totally works. Because the game considers you as having 4 energy attached, so you're good. Same question, but 1 Ignition Energy? Yes. Because Ignition Energy counts as free energy, therefore you've got free energy attached, therefore you can heal with your Jumbo Ice Cream. Job's a good 'un. Can I use Toxtricity to accelerate a Darkness Energy? Remember, you got to take 2 damage counters when you do. To accelerate to a Bench Darkness Pokemon with 20 or less HP remaining? Yeah, of course you can. It will knock it out, and that would arguably be silly. Not all the time, but sometimes. But you absolutely still can. Some people are going to get confused about this because it seems very similar in some ways to Gardevoir, an ability that accelerates energy at the cost of 2 damage counters. The big difference here is that Gardevoir very specifically says that you cannot use it if it would cause a Pokemon to be knocked out. But because Toxtricity doesn't say that, you absolutely can. Cool. Can I use this and avoid choosing a basic Darkness Energy from my deck? Yes, you can. Just shuffle your deck and end the ability. This is important just as a cheeky way to search your deck, for instance. But essentially the deck is private, so even if there's no Darkness Energy, your opponent doesn't know, so you can still use this just as a way to have a gander through your deck. Now, the new Survivor's got an ability whereby you do 120 damage more if you've got a Darkness-type Mega Evolution Pokemon in play. Well, does this mean that if you use a TM, for instance, you can get the extra 120 damage? Yeah, of course you can. That Crisis Punch, yeah, that one, now does 400 damage, which is honestly kind of funny. Now, there is a Flygon in the set. Flygon's got an ability whereby when you evolve into it and when it's KO'd, you get to discard the top 2 cards of your opponent's deck. Decent mill, but I don't think it's particularly exciting. Sorry. Well, what if you're knocked out by Mega Sharpedo's Greedy Fang, which is the one where they draw 2 cards? What happens first? Do they draw 2, or do you discard the top 2 cards of their deck, bearing in mind it could have a huge effect as to whether they draw the cards they need or you discard the cards they need? And the answer is that the effect of the move Greedy Fang draws you 2 cards first, because that is the attack that is happening, that goes first. Well, if I evolved a Flygon from my hand, and it didn't use its ability Sand Leap, if it's knocked out by damage from an opponent's Pokemon's attack, can I still use this when it's KO'd? Yes. Absolutely. It's not a you have to, it's a you may, but if you didn't choose to do it the first time, you can still do it the second. What about the 151 Aerodactyl? Using the Devolution attack, it devolves by 1 stage. Does that get around Sand Leap? Yes. Because the Pokemon that's knocked out isn't Flygon. The Pokemon that's knocked out is Vibrava, so it totally still works. Now, Mismagius comes in with an EX of a really interesting ability, whereby if it's active and your opponent's active Pokemon is switched back to the bench, the new active Pokemon is confused. Well, what if I use Eldegoss to knock out a Mismagius while switching to the bench, because it's got an attack that does 50 and moves to the bench? In that situation, does my incoming Pokemon still end up confused, or does the fact I get a KO stop the confusion? They still get confused, because you do the damage, but then you finish resolving the attack, including the switching, before you check to see if there's a knockout. So you switch before you check for knockout, at which point the Mismagius is still there. Sorry, ladies and gentlemen, this doesn't work. Never mind. Now, Low Kicks comes in here. We've got an attack which returns this Pokemon and all cards attached to it to your deck. Okay. Well, what if I use this? Does my new Pokemon become confused? No. Because the active Pokemon was never switched to the bench, it went to the hand, and therefore this doesn't activate, which is a fun way around it. What about Professor Turo's scenario, which puts a Pokemon into your hand? Will that activate Mismagius? No, because the Pokemon hasn't gone to the bench. What if I use Team Rocket's Giovanni, which switches both active Pokemon? No, you don't get the confusion here. The reason is you have to switch first, and because you have to switch first, then essentially you switch, your Mismagius is no longer active, your opponent switches, the Mismagius isn't there, never mind. Similar kind of deal with Prime Catcher. Prime Catcher does work because I switch my opponent's Pokemon, then I switch my own. So I switch my opponent while Mismagius is there to confuse, then I switch my opponent, but I'm still there to confuse them. Job's a good un. What if Dusknoir uses Curse Blast and then a new Pokemon comes active? Does it get confused? No, because the active Pokemon never switched to the bench. Lot of rulings about the same card, but the deal here is very simple. Was Mismagius active? And did a Pokemon actually switch to the bench when it was active? Simple as that. Now, there's a really interesting Pawmot in the set, and basically you can do 60 damage to yourself and then get automatic paralysis. Okay, but what if you attack into the Pachirisu that's got an ability that stops it being paralyzed? Do you still take the 60 damage? Yeah, of course you do. The paralysis fails, that's a little bit upsetting, but you still take the extra 60 damage. What if you use this when Pawmot's got 60 HP or less remaining? You'll KO Pawmot, but will you still get the paralysis? Yeah, of course you will. You still do, the whole move is one thing. Remember what I said a second ago. You finish resolving the attack before you check for KOs. So you do the 60 damage, you're now over your HP, but you haven't checked yet. You do the paralysis, the move is resolved, then you check and you get KO'd. That's fine. You've still got the paralysis before you get there. Rotom EX has a really nice ability that says all your Pokemon with Rotom in their name can have up to 2 Pokemon tools attached. Hey, if I've got more than 1 Rotom EX, can I have more than 2 tools? No. It doesn't say 1 extra or 2 extra, it says they can have 2. So no matter how many Rotom EX you've got, they all say you can have 2 tools exactly. There's an Oricorio EX in the set, lets you accelerate as much fire energy as you like to your bench fire Pokemon, just so long as you've got a Darkness type Mega Pokemon EX in play. Well, what about the Scovillain that's got dual type? Can I accelerate to that? Yes. Because while it's in play, it's a fire type. It's not in your hand or in your discard or any of that. It doesn't matter. It doesn't need to be. While it's in play, it totally works. Now there's a new Mega Heracross EX coming along in the set. It's got a really nice attack for 2 energy that does 100 damage, and if it was damaged by an attack during your opponent's last turn, this attack does that much more damage. Well, if I was hit for, say, 200, and then I healed 30, how much extra do I hit? 200. Doesn't matter if you healed or not, the healing is irrelevant. It only matters how much was actually done. Okay. What if it was hit for 100 damage on the bench and then became active? How much does it do now? 200. Because it took damage last turn, even on the bench, totally counts. So there we go. That's what you need to know. Those are the rules from Inferno X. What is going to end up being Phantasmal Flames over here. Some of them are pretty gosh darned important, but I've told you about them all now. So now it's over to you guys. Tell me which of these makes sense. Tell me if any of these are still confusing. Tell me what you've learned. Go nuts in the comment section, but be nice. And then make sure you like this video, subscribe to this channel, follow me on Twitter at @TheWasi. That's where we talk about Pokemon and a whole bunch of other card games. And please do consider checking out patreon.com/PTCG Radio, where you can support the channel, get some bonus podcasts, join a Discord, and all kinds of fun things. And get shoutouts on the channel, like the lovely Quentin Journeau, who's been a supporter of ours for a while now and seems to be a very lovely person. So shout out to them for the support and the loveliness. But by far the most important thing as always, look after yourselves till next time, would ya? Thank you very much for watching. My name's Ross, and you've been watching PTCG Radio.